You stand at the western edge of the churchyard, where the lane dips into a fold of meadow, and the grass-grown verge gives way to a low stone wall topped with a tangle of old man's beard. The afternoon is quiet in the manner peculiar to late September in the year 1720, high and pale and almost without wind, the sky a soft wash of cloud so thin it seems to dissolve into the blue behind it. A few rooks pass overhead, their calls faint and unhurried, and a wren ticks in the hedgerow. You have walked this path more times than you can count, yet each crossing remains its own small event, never exactly the same light, the same weight of air, the same pattern of shadows stretching from the yew trees. Today the shadows are long and soft-edged, falling to your left across the shorn grass that still holds a trace of green beneath the tawny tips. You carry a satchel of worn brown leather over one shoulder, the strap settling into the groove it has made in your coat these many years. Inside the satchel you have placed a lump of tallow wrapped in a piece of linen, a spare length of hemp cord coiled neatly, a wooden wedge whittled from beech to the precise taper required for the bell frame, and a square of coarse cloth for wiping your hands clean. None of these objects weighs heavily, but you feel their presence as a familiar comfort, each thing known by touch and purpose. The path through the churchyard is narrow and paved with old flagstones that have been laid so long in the earth the grass and moss have crept over their edges, softening every outline. Your boots make a low sound, a kind of scuff and press that is half lost in the turf, and the sensation underfoot is forgiving, almost springy from the mat of roots beneath. You pass a stone lich-gate whose timbers have weathered to silver grey, its roof of stone tiles still holding a faint bloom of lichen in ochre and pale green. Beyond the gate, the church comes fully into view. A building of grey-brown stone with a square tower that rises without ornament above the nave, its corners edged with simple quoins. The belfry windows are set high, 4 louvred openings darkened by the slats that angle inward, and from this distance they seem like calm, watching eyes. A low porch extends from the south wall, its gable shadowed by a massive yew whose branches sweep almost to the ground. You have seen this church in every season and every hour, but in the unoccupied stillness of a weekday afternoon, it holds a particular quality, a sense of waiting without demand. You approach the porch with a slow, even stride, noting the way the gravel underfoot changes to worn flagstones at the threshold, their surfaces hollowed slightly by generations of feet. The heavy oak door stands ajar, as it often does on days when no service is held, opening just wide enough for a person to slip through without having to push. The iron hinges are dark with age and recent oil, and the wood of the door is studded with square-headed nails that have left faint orange streaks where rain has touched them. You place your hand flat on the door's edge and ease it open a few inches more, enough to step inside without brushing your shoulder, and then let it drift back to its former position, with a soft, solid thud that echoes once and then fades into the stone. The interior of the church greets you with a wave of cool air that carries a blend of scents so thoroughly woven together that separating them would be impossible. Old stone that has been damp for centuries and then dried by 100 summers, beeswax polished into the wood of the box pews, the faintest hint of spent incense from a service held days ago, and something else, a dry, papery smell from the prayer books and the leather-bound register stored in the vestry. The change in temperature is immediate and welcome after the warmth of the sun outside, a gentle coolness that settles on your skin and seems to slow everything down. You stand for a moment just inside the door, letting your eyes adjust to the muted light that enters through the tall leaded windows, each one set with small panes of pale greenish glass. The sunlight that passes through them loses its harsh edge and falls in slanted columns across the nave, illuminating motes of dust that hang almost still in the air, drifting so slowly you have to watch for a long breath to see any motion at all. The flagstones of the nave are larger and more even than those outside, their surfaces worn to a low polish by the countless feet of parishioners over 2 centuries or more. Each stone has its own character. One bears a faint fossilized curl of shell, another a crack that has been filled with lead, yet another a shallow depression where a drop of water must have fallen from the roof over many decades. You walk forward with a measured tread, and your footsteps sound differently here than they did on the path. A quiet, flat report that spreads into the high spaces of the roof, and is absorbed by the wooden ceiling, which is painted with faded stars on a blue ground, though the stars are so dim now they resemble patches of paler wood grain more than celestial bodies. The box pews stand in rows on either side, their doors closed and their hinged benches visible through the gaps, and the dark wood of their backs shows the marks of the adze that shaped them, slight scalloped grooves that catch the dim light in long horizontal bands. As you move deeper into the nave, you pass a wall memorial of white marble framed by dark stone, carved with scrolls and a single cherub's head whose features have softened with time, until they seem to smile with a gentle, almost vegetable expression. The lettering is a mix of Latin and English, incised deep and once filled with black pigment that has now flaked away except in the deepest cuts, leaving the names legible only when the light strikes them from a certain angle. You do not stop to read them, but you notice them as you pass, just as you notice the faint tick of a long case clock that stands in the north transept, its case of dark oak and its face a white enamel moon, with brass hands that show the hour to be a few minutes past 2. The tick is steady and dry, a sound that belongs so completely to the place that it might as well be the church's own heartbeat, and it continues without variation while you cross the last stretch of the nave and approach the tower arch. The arch itself is a simple pointed opening of bare stone, unadorned except for a chamfered edge that runs up one side, across the point, and down the other. Within it sits a low door of oak planks, iron hinged and fitted with a ring handle that hangs against the wood on a circular plate. A small window above the door admits a shaft of light that picks out the grain of the wood and shows a fine network of cracks, where the planks have shrunk and swollen with the seasons. You set your satchel down on the end of a pew that stands near the arch and open the leather flap, though you do not yet remove anything, simply checking that the tallow and the wedge and the cord are all in their places. The cloth you will use later, and you tuck it more securely beside the tallow so it will not fall out when you lift the bag again. These small adjustments are part of the ritual, as much as the ringing itself, and you perform them without haste, your fingers moving with the slow certainty of long practice. Now you turn to the lantern that hangs on a hook beside the tower door, a simple horn-paned lantern with a stub of candle inside that you left here from the week before. You take it down and open the small door, tilting the lantern so the light catches the wax. Then you retrieve your tinder box from the satchel and work the steel, the flint, and the char cloth in that familiar sequence of small sounds, a few quiet clicks, and the brief scent of smouldering linen before the candle takes the flame. The light strengthens and steadies, and the horn panes glow with an amber warmth that shifts the shadows across the floor as you lift the lantern. Its handle is warm against your palm, and the candle flame behind the translucent horn produces a soft, diffused light that will be enough to see by in the narrow stair without casting the sharp, dancing shadows that a naked flame would throw. You close the tinder box and return it to the satchel, then lift the satchel and the lantern together, steady in both hands. The handle of the tower door is cool and smooth, worn bright where hands have grasped it. It turns with a quiet, well-oiled sound, and the door opens toward you, its bottom edge scraping slightly against the stone threshold with a whisper of friction. The space beyond is darker than the nave, the only illumination coming from your lantern and from a narrow slit window high up on the first turn of the stair. You step inside and the air here is different again, cooler still and carrying the faint mineral scent of old mortar, along with a woody note from the timber framework of the tower itself. The spiral staircase begins immediately, its steps cut from the same stone as the walls, worn into smooth hollows by the feet of bell ringers who have climbed this way for more than a generation before you. You place your free hand on the stone wall, which is cool and slightly rough under your palm, and you begin to climb, your pace slow and rhythmic, each step a deliberate placement of your boot on the worn tread, then the transfer of your weight, then the next step, and so on. The staircase winds to the right, the central pillar a solid column of stone that seems to have been left when the rest was carved away, and the outer wall follows the curve with an even thickness. At intervals of 7 or 8 steps, a slit window lets in a blade of daylight, each one illuminating a small section of the wall opposite, where you can see the marks of the stonecutter's tools, short diagonal lines from a chisel, and the occasional small fossil, a scallop shell or a curl of crinoid set fast in the grey stone. You pass a cobweb that stretches from the central pillar to the outer wall, its silk so fine it appears to float in the lantern light, and you dip your head slightly to avoid disturbing it, though the air you displace as you climb sets the outer strands trembling. The sound of your breathing becomes more apparent as you rise, a soft, steady rhythm that bounces gently from the curving walls, and your footsteps echo with a slight delay, the sound climbing ahead of you and returning altered, as though another person were descending. The temperature rises by a degree or two as you go higher, the stone absorbing the sun's warmth from the outside, so that the air loses its chill and becomes merely cool, comfortable against your skin. You begin to count the steps in your mind, a habit that serves no practical purpose beyond marking the ascent and keeping your thoughts from wandering too far from the moment. The count reaches 42 by the time you come to a small landing, where the stair straightens for a few paces before curling once more upward. This landing has a low wooden door to one side, the door to the ringing chamber, but you do not stop there today, for your work is in the belfry above. You continue, and the steps grow slightly narrower here, the rise a little higher, evidence of the mason's adaptation to the available space as they neared the top of the tower. Your hand slides along the stone, feeling the change in texture where the wall has been repaired at some distant time with a patch of paler mortar, its surface smoother than the surrounding stone. The light from the slit windows becomes brighter as you ascend, for there are fewer obstructions outside at this height, and the windows themselves are slightly larger, allowing more of the afternoon light to enter. Through one of them you catch a fleeting glimpse of the churchyard below, the green of the yews and the pale grey line of the path. But you do not pause to look, only register it as you climb. At length, after what might have been 3 or 4 minutes of steady, methodical climbing, you reach the final steps and the low opening that leads into the belfry chamber. The walls here are of oak timber instead of stone, massive vertical posts connected by horizontal beams and diagonal braces, all pegged together with tree nails that stand slightly proud of the surface. The floor is also of wood, broad planks that run the width of the chamber and show the scars of use, deep indentations where the bell frame stands, and lighter scuffs from the feet of ringers. The transition from stone to wood is marked by a small threshold beam that you step over carefully, and then you are inside, standing upright in the belfry's square space, your lantern casting its gentle glow across the great bell and the framework that supports it. The afternoon sunlight enters through the louvered openings on all 4 sides, falling in wide, dusty bands that cross the chamber and meet at shifting angles on the floor. You set the satchel and lantern on a low beam that runs along the south wall, and you take a long breath, feeling the air in your lungs and the quiet sense of arrival that comes with reaching the place where the work is to be done. The nave stretches before you in the quiet that follows your entry, a long, cool space, suffused with the filtered light of a sun that has passed its highest point and now begins its slow descent toward the western hills. The tall windows, set in deep stone reveals, are assembled from hundreds of small diamond-shaped panes held in a web of lead, and they transform the bright afternoon into something softer, a silvery grey glow that fills the upper reaches and leaves the floor in a gentle dimness. Dust spirals in the light beams, rising and sinking in currents too slow for the eye to track, and the wooden ceiling high above, with its painted stars and faded blue ground, seems to absorb sound as much as light, giving the whole nave a sense of deep-held breath. You pause on the rush matting that runs the length of the central aisle, its fibers flattened and darkened by the passage of Sunday shoes and workday boots, and you let the stillness settle around your shoulders like a familiar garment. The box pews stand in ordered rows to either side, their tall backs topped with a simple moulding that catches the light in a continuous pale line, each pew door closed and each small bench inside hidden from view, though you know them well enough, oak polished by generations of seated families, the faint marks of initials scratched by restless children, the kneeling cushions covered in faded wool, embroidery that has worn thin at the corners. The pew ends are carved with simple finials, some in the shape of a folded leaf, others a blunt acorn, and the wood of the pews is the same dark, seasoned oak as the door you came through, its surface marked by a fine network of age cracks that run along the grain like the lines on a palm. You notice how the light falls upon the north side differently from the south, the north windows admitting a cooler, more even illumination, because the sun is on the opposite face of the church, while the south windows, though not in direct sun, still hold a memory of warmth that seems to colour the air in that half of the nave a shade more golden. Between the windows, the walls are plastered and whitewashed, the lime coating showing the faint undulations of the stonework beneath, and in several places a patch of older painting has begun to show through, the ghost of a red ochre pattern that no one living remembers. On the eastern wall, above the chancel arch, hangs a wooden rood screen of simple tracery, its openings filled with the dim glow of the east window beyond, where pale saints stand in coloured glass. You do not study these things in any analytical way. You simply receive them as the eye receives a gentle landscape, without strain, without the need to name or catalogue. The smell of the church is more complex indoors than it was at the porch. Beneath the beeswax and the stone, there is now a dry, almost papery scent from the large Bible that lies open on a brass eagle lectern near the chancel step, its pages slightly buckled from years of damp winters and dry summers. The lectern's eagle has outspread wings of polished brass that catch the window light in a dull gleam, and the book upon its back is open to the Psalms, the black ink of the letters clear even at a distance. To the right of the chancel arch, the pulpit rises in octagonal oak, its panels carved with a flowing vine pattern that twists and turns without beginning or end, and its sounding board hangs above it like a broad wooden halo suspended by an iron rod from the roof. The cushion on the pulpit's reading desk is of deep green velvet, patchy now and faded to a soft mossy colour, and a single ribbon bookmark hangs over the edge, motionless. You step forward from the matting onto the cool flagstones of the central aisle, and the faint sound of your boot is answered by a soft echo from the chancel, a hollow replication that arrives a moment later, as if the stone itself were murmuring the same note back from a great distance. The long case clock that you heard earlier continues to measure the afternoon, its tick a dry, unhurried pulse that seems to regulate the very light, and as you pass the north transept, you see its brass pendulum sweeping in a slow arc behind a glass panel, the motion so steady and so silent that it might be the movement of the church's own heart. You walk with a gait that neither hurries nor loiters, each step a considered transfer of weight from heel to toe, and you let your gaze drift across the nave's furnishings with the idle attention of one who knows them all, but still finds small differences. The way a cobweb has been spun overnight between two pew doors, the single petal from an altar flower that has fallen onto the step and dried to a crisp brown scroll, the candle in a wall sconce that has burned further down, that is the font stands near the west end, a massive octagonal bowl of dark stone set on a central stem and four outer legs, its wooden cover suspended on a pulley from the ceiling. The cover is carved in tiers of diminishing size, each one a ring of arcading, and it hangs a few inches above the bowl, its lowest edge just clearing the stone rim. You pass it without stopping, though you note the faint watermark inside the bowl, a ring of pale discoloration that shows the font is used and tended. By the time you reach the end of a pew near the tower arch, you have crossed the full length of the nave, and you set your satchel down on the bench, the leather making a soft rustle against the wood. The tower arch is darker at its apex than the rest of the nave, because the window above it is smaller and set deeper, and the door within the arch seems to absorb the little light that reaches it. You stand for a moment with your hand resting on the satchel, not from any need to delay, but simply because the rhythm of the afternoon does not press upon you. The clock strikes the quarter hour in the transept, a light, musical note that rings twice and then fades, and in the silence that follows you hear, for the first time since entering, the distant sound of a rook cawing from the Belfry louvers high above, a sound so faint it might be imagination. The air inside the church is still, yet not stagnant. It moves imperceptibly. A slow exchange through the porch door and the roof fence, carrying the faintest hint of warm grass from outside. You unfasten the flap of the satchel and look inside, not because you have forgotten what it holds, but because the act of checking is part of the preparation, a way of bringing your mind into readiness. The teller is there, wrapped in its linen, the spare cord coiled in a neat figure of 8, the beechwood wedge tucked into a corner, and the cloth folded squarely. You lift the lantern from its hook beside the tower door, the same horn-paned lantern you always use, and you turn it in your hands, examining the panes for cracks, the wick for length, the beeswax candle for any sign of having fallen sideways in its socket. Satisfied, you open the small door and set the lantern on the pew beside the satchel while you retrieve the tinderbox. The steel and flint and char cloth are worn smooth from use, their surfaces speaking of countless repetitions, and you strike them together without haste, coaxing the spark to the char, then the flame to the wick, until the candle burns with a steady amber flame that lights the horn from within until it glows like a small captured sun. The smell of hot wax and smouldering wick is briefly sharp and then fades into the church's larger fragrance. You close the tinderbox and return it to the satchel, then lift the lantern by its warm handle, steadying the flame with the care born of long habit. The tower door opens toward you with the same quiet groan you recall, its iron hinges moving in a film of oil that has darkened the metal over years. The space beyond is narrow and cool, smelling of stone dust and old mortar, and the first steps of the spiral staircase rise immediately from the threshold, curving away to the right into a darkness that the lantern only partly dispels. You close the door behind you with a gentle push, and the sound of the latch settling into its iron keep is low and final, shutting out the clock's tick and the vast quiet of the nave, replacing them with a closer, more intimate stillness. The stone walls of the stair are rough under your free hand, their surfaces pitted and uneven, and the steps descend in the opposite direction from the climb you are about to make, for the staircase winds upward in the same tight spiral that it follows downward to the ringing chamber. You begin to climb, your boots finding the hollows worn into the center of each tread, and the rhythm of the ascent settles upon you with the first few steps, a slow, steady pattern that matches the pace of your breathing. The first slit window appears after a dozen steps, a narrow vertical opening that lets in a blade of pearly daylight across the stone opposite, illuminating a patch of wall where the medieval masons left their marks. A small incised cross, a zigzag line, a date that might be 1487 or 1467, the final digit obscured by a later patch of mortar. You continue upward, and the sound of your footsteps bounces from the curving walls in complex echoes that arrive from several directions at once. A soft, disembodied scuff, scuff, scuff that seems to follow you like a companion. The air grows warmer by degrees, the stone absorbing the heat of the sun from the tower's outer face, and the mineral scent of old mortar is joined by the dry, woody smell of the timber framework that begins to appear at the landings. Massive beams that tie the stone walls together and support the bell chamber above. You pass the door to the ringing chamber, a low plank door set in a stone arch, its iron latch hanging loose, and through a gap at the bottom you can see the ends of the bell ropes rising from the floor below, a dozen or more hemp lines that hang with the weight of unseen bells, their sallies tucked into loops out of sight. You do not pause, but the sight registers in your mind as a note of readiness, a reminder that the bell you will tend is one among many, a single voice in a silent choir. The staircase narrows after the ringing chamber, the steps becoming slightly steeper and the curve tighter, so that you must angle your shoulders to avoid brushing the central pillar. The lantern light casts your shadow onto the wall in a series of moving shapes, and you can hear the faint creak of the timber above as the tower shifts by a fraction in the afternoon warmth. Another slit window appears, brighter now because it faces south, and through it you catch a glimpse of the churchyard far below. The gravestones leaning at various angles, their inscriptions, invisible but their grey shapes clear against the green of the grass. The climbing settles into a meditation of motion, each step an individual event that passes and is replaced by the next, without hurry, without ambition, and you lose yourself in the simple physical act of ascending, the flex of your knees, the feel of the uneven treads through your soles, the cool stone under your palm, the steady glow of the lantern that lights the way ahead. You count the steps without meaning to, a low murmur at the back of your mind, and the numbers rise until they lose meaning and become merely a soft accompaniment to the sound of your breathing. As you near the top, the structure changes. The stone walls give way to oak timber posts and beams, the old wood dark with age and polished in places by the brush of shoulders over centuries. The staircase straightens for the final few steps, and you see above you the square opening that leads into the belfry chamber, a threshold marked by a heavy oak beam laid flat, its surface scarred with chisel marks and bearing the faint remains of a carpenter's mark, a circle with a cross inside. The light from the belfry falls through this opening in a broad shaft, brighter than the lantern's glow, and it carries the scent of warm wood and dust and the faint metallic tang of the great bell. You climb the last 2 steps and stand with your head just below the beam, looking up into the chamber, where the louvered windows frame rectangles of pale sky, and the bell rests in its frame, still and silent. The climb is over, and a space above you waits with its particular silence, a silence that is not empty, but filled with the presence of the bell and the history of its ringing. You place the lantern on the top step and use both hands to lift yourself through the opening, stepping over the threshold beam with the carefulness that the height deserves, and then you are inside the belfry, the wooden floor creaking softly under your weight, the afternoon light falling on your shoulders, and the great bronze bell suspended before you, waiting to be stirred. You stand at last within the belfry chamber, the wooden floor firm and slightly springy beneath your boots, and the afternoon light that falls through the 4 louvered openings washes the entire space in a warm, diffuse glow that seems almost tangible. The chamber is a square room of moderate size, perhaps 12 feet to a side, constructed almost entirely of oak timbers that were shaped by axes and adzes long before anyone now living drew breath. The corner posts are massive, 12 inches square at a glance, and they rise from the floor to meet the horizontal tie beams overhead with the simple, confident joinery of a bygone age, each joint pegged with tree nails that stand a little proud of the surface, their ends darkened by air and age. The walls between the posts are filled with vertical planks, each one an inch thick and a foot wide, their surfaces showing the faint scalloped marks of the adze that shaped them, ridges that run in long diagonal sweeps and catch the light in ribbons of shadow. Above the tie beams, the roof rafters angle upward to a central point, and between them, the underside of the roof boards is visible, dark brown and streaked with the faint tide marks of old, long-dried leaks that have not troubled the tower in living memory. The louvered openings occupy most of each wall, the slats angled steeply downward to keep out rain while admitting light and air, and through the gaps between the slats you can see pale rectangles of sky, the blue muted by a high veil of cirrus cloud that has drifted across the sun. The great bell hangs at the center of this space, suspended in a wooden frame that is itself a work of carpenter's art. The frame consists of 2 heavy side timbers, each one a foot thick and 3 feet deep, connected by cross beams at the top and bottom, the whole assembly braced with diagonal struts that transfer the bell's weight down through the floor beams and into the tower walls. The wood of the frame is darker than the walls, almost black in the shadows, and it has a dense, seasoned look, its grain tight and straight, its surface polished in places by the rubbing of ropes and the hands of long-gone ringers who steadied themselves against it. Iron bolts with square heads secure the main joints, and a faint dusting of orange rust traces the edges of each washer. The bell itself hangs from a headstock, a horizontal beam of oak that pivots on iron gudgeons set into the top of the frame, and from this headstock the bell depends, its bronze surface catching the light in a soft, green-tinged darkness that seems to absorb and hold the glow rather than reflect it. The bell is large, perhaps 3 feet across at the mouth, and its shape is the familiar flared curve of a country church bell, swelling outward from the crown to the sound bow, where the metal thickens into a heavy rim. The surface of the bronze is not smooth but pebbled with the texture of the casting sand, and in places you can see the faint outlines of the inscription that runs around the waist, raised letters that spell out a name and a date and a fragment of Latin, though the letters are so worn by weather and the cleanings of ages that some are now no more than gentle bumps in the metal. The clapper hangs motionless inside the bell, a long iron rod with a heavy spherical end suspended from a staple set into the crown, and it rests just off true vertical because the bell is in its down position, the mouth facing slightly toward the south louvers. A thin film of dust has settled on the upper surfaces of the bell, on the headstock, on the iron gudgeons, and on the tops of the frame timbers, dust so fine it might have drifted from the plaster of the nave ceiling or blown in through the louvers over many months. The dust is grey and soft, and it shifts slightly when a current of air moves through the chamber, though the air is so still today that the dust remains almost undisturbed, except for the tiny motes that dance in the shafts of sunlight, rising and falling in slow spirals that seem to follow their own quiet purpose. The floor beneath the bell is marked by a dark circle where the feet of ringers have worn the wood smooth, and at the edge of this circle you can see the round hole through which the bell rope passes, descending all the way down the tower to the ringing chamber below. The rope itself rises through the hole, passes up and over a wooden wheel set above the headstock, and then drops straight down to a point near the south wall, where the sallie hangs at a convenient height for a ringer's hands. The rope is of 3-stranded hemp, roughly an inch in diameter. Its color a pale golden brown that darkens where it has been handled, and the sallie is a woolen section woven in a chevron pattern of faded red and cream, bulking the rope to twice its regular thickness for a length of about 3 feet. The wheel above the bell is a marvel of balance construction, a wooden disc nearly 4 feet across with a deep groove turned into its rim to guide the rope, and it rotates on iron axles set into the frame. The wood of the wheel is ash, pale and tight-grained, and its surface has been burnished to a soft sheen by the passage of the hemp rope over countless rings. The spokes of the wheel are 6 in number, shaped with a slight curve like the arms of a water wheel, and they meet the hub in tapered joints that have never loosened. Around the rim, the rope sits in its groove with the easy fit of long association, and when the wheel turns, it turns with a low, creaking sound that is not a complaint, but a voice. The sound of wood and iron and hemp working together in the way they were designed to do. The gudgeons, the iron axles on which the headstock pivots, are set into brass bearings that are lubricated with tallow, and a faint smear of old grease darkens the wood around each bearing. The tallow long since cooled and hardened to a waxy crust. The stay, the safety bar of ash wood bolted across the headstock, stands out horizontally above the wheel, and the slider, a wooden block mounted on runners, waits in its place, ready to catch the stay if the bell should swing too far. The whole assembly, bell and frame and wheel and stay, fills the center of the chamber with a presence that is both mechanical and solemn, a thing of purpose and weight and long-established order. You stand near the south louvers, your satchel and lantern resting on the low beam that runs along the wall, and you let your eyes travel slowly over the details of the chamber. The quality of the light is such that shadows are soft and multiple, falling from several directions at once because the louvred openings admit the sky's radiance from all 4 points of the compass. The north louvres face away from the sun and show a cooler bluish light. The south louvres are warmer, almost golden, where the sun has been passing, and the east and west louvres hold a middle tone, a clear, neutral brightness that fills the center of the room. The air up here is warm and dry, heated by the sun on the roof tiles and the timber walls, and it carries a complex scent that you have come to know as the scent of the belfry itself. The dominant note is old wood, the deep, dusty fragrance of oak that has been drying for centuries, releasing the last traces of sap and tannin into the air. Beneath this is the mineral smell of iron, the gudgeons and bolts and the clapper staple, a cool metallic tang that catches at the back of the throat. Then there is the faint oily aroma of the tallow, a scent that is both animal and sweet, and beneath that the dry grassy smell of the hemp rope, and beneath even that, the breath of the outside air that filters through the louvers, carrying the distant sweetness of cut hay and the earthiness of the churchyard grass. These smells do not compete but mingle into a single harmonious atmosphere that fills your lungs and seems to slow the beating of your heart. The stillness is not silence. The belfry has its own quiet music, a composite of small sounds that you only become aware of when you stop moving and listen. The most constant is the soft whisper of air passing through the louvers, a sound so low it is barely more than a texture on the edge of hearing, like the sea heard from a great distance. Then there is the occasional creak of a timber as the sun warms one side of the tower and not the other, a tiny expansion that releases the wood with a gentle, settling sigh. The pigeons that roost in the tower roof coo intermittently, their notes a low, round murmur that seems to come from everywhere at once, and from far below, attenuated by stone and wood and height, you can hear the distant caw of rooks in the churchyard yews, and the faint, intermittent bark of a farm dog in a field beyond the lane. These sounds are not interruptions but part of the stillness, each one a small event that rises and fades and leaves the quiet deeper than before. The motes of dust continue their slow dance in the shafts of light, and the bell waits with a patience that has no measure. Its bronze surface dim and ancient and beautiful, its inscription murmuring in a language you cannot quite decipher, and the wheel and the stay and the sallie all poised in their respective balances, waiting for the first pull that will stir them into life. You take a step forward onto the worn circle of the floor, and the plank beneath you creaks softly, a sound that travels up through the bell frame and sets the iron gudgeons humming for a fraction of a second. The rope sways once, a barely perceptible motion, and then returns to stillness. You reach out and touch the great side post of the bell frame, laying your palm flat against the ancient oak, feeling the dry warmth of the wood and the faint vibration that lives within it, still from the last time the bell was rung, a memory of sound held in the fibers. The surface is smooth under your hand, polished not by intent, but by the passage of countless hands before yours, ringers who steadied themselves here in the same way, feeling the same quiet, seeing the same dust dance in the same light. You withdraw your hand and let your eyes rise to the headstock, to the wheel with its grooved rim, to the stay bar poised in the upper shadows, and you understand, without forming the thought in words, that everything is in order, and the afternoon is unhurried, and the afternoon is unhurried, and the bell is ready. The light continues to shift by the smallest degree, the sun moving on its arc beyond the louvers, and the shadows on the floorboards lengthen almost imperceptibly, a slow clock of light and wood that marks the passing of a quiet hour in a quiet century. The rope hangs before you in the still air of the belfry, descending from the round hole in the floor above the bell frame and passing up over the wheel before dropping to its termination at the height of a man's chest, where the sallie waits with its faded chevrons. You have seen it countless times, yet on each occasion there is something to notice, something small that has altered since the last ringing. A slight shift in the way the hemp fibers have settled, a new patch of darkening where hands have touched, a fine dust that has drifted onto the woolen grip. The light from the louvred windows falls across the rope at an angle that picks out the twist of the strands and gives the whole line a gentle glow, the pale gold of clean hemp blending into the deeper gold of oiled fibers and then into the soft red and cream of the sallie. You take a step toward it, leaving your satchel and lantern on the low beam, and the floorboard creaks under your weight in a sound that rises and fades without echo. The rope is crafted from 3 strands of hemp, each one spun from many fine fibers twisted together in the opposite direction to the rope's own lay, a technique that gives it the strength to hold the bell's weight without stretching or fraying. The strands are uniform in thickness, about 1/3 of an inch in diameter, and they spiral around one another in a continuous helix that runs the entire length from the ringing chamber to the wheel and back down again. At the point where the rope passes through the sealing hole, the wood has been smoothed into a gentle radius, its edges worn glassy by years of cordage moving up and down, and the hemp there is slightly polished on its outer surface, catching the light with a subtle sheen. The rope's color is not one shade but many, a base of pale flaxen brown that deepens to honey where the fibers are most dense, and here and there a darker fleck where a bit of bark or stem was spun into the strand, tiny imperfections that add to the rope's character without compromising its strength. Where the rope has been handled most frequently, just above the sallie and slightly below it, the hemp has taken on a patina of oil and fine dust, a smooth, darkened surface that feels almost waxy to the touch and smells faintly of the human hands that have worked it. You stop a pace short of the hanging line and stand with your arms loose at your sides, letting your eyes travel upward along the rope's length. It rises straight and true, its natural plumb barely deflected by the almost imperceptible current of air that moves through the belfry, and where it meets the wheel above, it sits in the groove with the easy, confident fit of a thing that belongs exactly where it is. The wheel is half lit and half shadowed, the ash spokes pale against the dark timbers of the frame, and the rope runs around its upper arc in a smooth bend that does not kink or flatten. From the wheel, the rope returns downward on the near side, passing through a wooden guide block that keeps it aligned, and this secondary descent brings the sallie to its hanging position, suspended about 4 feet from the floor and perfectly vertical. The sallie itself is a thicker portion of the rope, built up by weaving woolen yarns directly into the hemp core, and it extends for roughly 3 feet, the lower end tapering back into plain rope over a length of 6 inches, where the wool has been carefully spliced and whipped with tarred twine. You advance the last step and reach out your right hand, not to pull but to touch, laying your palm flat against the woolen surface of the sallie just below its midpoint. The wall is densely woven, the yarns having been worked in a chevron pattern that alternates bands of faded red with bands of cream, the reds so washed by light and used that they have become a soft terracotta, the creams a warm ivory. The weave is tight and even, the individual yarns lying close together so that the surface feels smooth when stroked downward and slightly rough when stroked upward against the nap, a texture that provides a secure grip without being abrasive. Under your palm, the wool gives just a little, compressing softly before reaching the firm core of hemp within, and the sensation is pleasant, a slight springiness that invites the fingers to close around it. The sallie is slightly thicker than the plain rope above it, perhaps 2 inches in diameter at its fullest, and it tapers gradually toward both ends, a shape that makes the grip comfortable in hands of any size. You let your hand slide downward along the sallie, feeling the point where the woolen weave gives way to the whipped twine of the splice, and you note how the transition is almost seamless. The twine wound so tightly and so neatly that there is no step or ridge to catch a finger. The spice itself is a work of careful hands, a joining of the woolen section to the plain hemp that requires the 3 strands of the rope to be unlaid, the wool worked in, and then the whole relaid with the new material incorporated so that the strength continues unbroken. The whipping, a tight binding of tarred twine wound in closely packed turns, covers the splice area for 3 inches above and below, and the twine is dark brown, almost black, its surface slightly tacky from the residue of the tar that was used to preserve it. You run your fingertip along the whipping, feeling the ridges where each turn of twine overlaps the next, and you test the tension by pressing with your thumbnail. The twine does not shift or separate, holding fast with the grit that it has maintained perhaps for years. The tar gives off a faint, sharp scent, a resinous note that mixes with the dry smell of the hemp and the dusty warmth of the Belfry air, and this scent intensifies when you touch the whipping, as though the heat of your finger releases it from the surface. You let your hand rise now, moving upward along the sallie, past the chevron weave with its soft nap, past a point where the red and cream bands meet and reverse direction in a sharp V, and onto the upper splice, where the wool once again gives way to hemp. The inspection is not hurried. You take the time to notice the fine details, the way the wool has worn slightly thinner on the side that faces away from the wall, the side that Ringer's palms have pressed most often. The pile is a little flatter there, the terracotta color a shade paler, and a few stray fibers have pulled loose and stand up in a faint halo, evidence of the friction of countless pulls. You smooth these stray fibers back down with your thumb, and they lie flat again, returning the sallie to its trim appearance. On the opposite side, the side that faces the wall and sees less wear, the wool is a bit more plush, the chevrons more distinct, and the cream shows less of the underlying hemp, its surface still bright and almost fleecy. The asymmetry is a record of use, a diary written in wool, and you note it without judgment, simply adding it to your knowledge of the rope's condition. Above the sallie, the plain hemp continues upward, and you shift your attention to this section, reaching higher with your left hand now and closing your fingers loosely around the rope. The hemp feels very different from the sallie, firmer, cooler, with a crispness that speaks of the plant fibers from which it was made. The 3 strands spiral under your palm, each one a continuous ribbon that twists around its neighbors in a regular, unhurried helix, and the spaces between the strands create a subtle texture that helps the fingers hold. You begin to move your hand slowly upward, letting the rope slide through your grip with a light pressure, and as you do, you feel for any irregularity, a thinning of a strand, a broken fiber that would snag the skin, a soft spot where internal wear has begun to weaken the cord. Your hand rises inch by inch, and the rope passes through your fingers with a faint whispering sound, the sound of dry fiber moving against dry skin. The hemp is clean and free of any visible dirt, though a fine dust has settled into the crevices between the strands, a dust so light it might be pollen or the powdered remains of leaves blown in through the louvers. You pause to brush this dust away with a flick of your thumb, and the rope beneath is bright and sound, the fibers glossy and intact. As you move higher, you come to the section where the rope passes through the wooden guide block, and here you stop and examine the hemp with particular care, for this is a place where wear often begins. The block itself is a piece of beech, shaped with a smooth groove that matches the rope's diameter, and its surface is polished by use, the wood grain standing out in fine, dark lines. The rope shows a slight compression where it contacts the block. The strands flatten just a little, but there is no fraying, no broken fibers, no sign of the abrasion that would signal a need for replacement. You rotate the rope a quarter turn between your fingers to inspect the opposite side, and it is equally sound, the hemp retaining its full strength and its natural springy resilience. You now step back and observe the rope as a whole, taking in its line and its plumb, the way it hangs from the wheel and through the guide block and down to the floor. A bell rope must hang straight if it is to be pulled cleanly, without any tendency to whip or swing, and this one hangs as straight as a plumb line, the sallie centered perfectly beneath the guide and the plain sections above and below aligned with a hole in the ceiling. The slight air current that you noticed earlier has died away, and the rope is now almost perfectly still, only the faintest tremor visible at the lower end where the sallie's weight keeps it under a gentle, constant tension. You kneel down to examine the tail of the rope that lies on the floor beyond the sallie, a length of about 10 feet of plain hemp that is used to give the ringer control during the upstroke. The tail is coiled in a loose figure-8 pattern on the boards, laid neatly so that it will pay out without tangling when the bell is rung, and you check the coil for any kinks or crossed loops, finding none. The very end of the rope is sealed with a whipping of tarred twine to prevent the strands from unlaying, and this whipping is intact and tight, the twine dark and glossy and smelling sharply of its preservative. While you are kneeling, you notice the way the floorboards have been worn around the rope's resting place, a shallow sweeping curve that describes the path of the tail as it has been coiled and uncoiled over years. The wood is smooth there, the grain raised into fine ridges by the abrasion of the rope, and the color is lighter than the surrounding boards, a patch of pale gold in the brown. You run your hand over this worn area, feeling the texture of the wood, the slight undulations that tell of seasons and ringers and countless afternoons, just like this one. Then you rise, your knees making a soft sound against the planks, and you stand once more before the rope, your inspection of its lower parts complete. Your gaze now lifts to the upper portion of the rope, the section that rises from the sallie to the wheel and then descends to the bell's headstock. This part of the rope is less accessible, but you can see it clearly in the slanting sunlight, the hemp blowing against the dark timbers of the frame. The strands appear uniform and taut, the lay even, and the rope runs fair into the wheel's groove without any twisting or flattening. The wheel itself creaks softly as you watch, a sound so faint it is barely there, the wood adjusting its shape by a hair's breadth in response to the changing temperature. The rope is motionless on the wheel, held by friction and by the balance of the bell's weight on the other end, a weight that you can feel even now as a sense of presence, a latent force waiting in the metal above. You reach up and touch the rope where it exits the wheel, placing your fingers on the hemp and feeling the slight, constant tension that speaks of the bell's mass suspended on the far side. Satisfied with the condition of the rope and the sallie, you step back to the low beam where your satchel rests and open the flap, withdrawing the small lump of tallow wrapped in its linen cloth. The tallow is firm and cool, its surface smooth and slightly greasy, and it smells of rendered fat, a clean, mild scent that is not unpleasant. You will use it later on the slider and the bearings, but for now you simply place it on the beam beside the lantern, where the warmth of the chamber will soften it gradually. The spare hemp cord you leave in the satchel, for there is no need of it today, and the beechwood wedge as well. The cloth for wiping your hands you tuck into your belt, where it hangs ready. These small preparations made, you turn again to face the center of the chamber, your eyes resting on the great bell that stands in its frame, and then on the rope that is its voice, and its connection to the world below. The sallie hangs quietly, its chevrons catching the light in soft bands of terracotta and cream, and the afternoon silence settles back into place, deeper now than it was before, as though the inspection has only confirmed the stillness that was here all along. You stand before the rope with the inspection behind you and the work ahead, a moment suspended between readiness and action, and you let it stretch because the afternoon asks nothing of speed. The Belfry light has shifted by a fraction, the sun having edged a little further west, so that the south louvers now admit a warmer, deeper gold, while the north openings keep their cooler silver, and the dust that dances in the intersecting beams seems to move with a slower, more deliberate grace than it did when you first arrived. The bell waits in its frame, the rope hangs quiet, and your own body feels the quiet, a calm that has settled into your limbs through the climb and the careful examinations. Now you remove your coat, a simple gesture that you perform without hurry, lifting the collar from your shoulders and folding the garment once, twice, and laying it across the low beam beside the satchel. The coat is of light wool, unlined, and it holds the smell of the lane and the churchyard and a trace of the hearth smoke from your house. With it off, the air of the Belfry feels cooler for a moment against your forearms, and then your skin adjusts, finding the temperature pleasant, neither warm nor chill. You roll up the sleeves of your linen shirt, turning the cuffs back in two neat folds that sit just below the elbow, and the linen is soft from many washings, its weave visible as a fine grid of pale threads against your skin. You return to the worn circle of floorboards beneath the rope, your boots finding the places where the wood is smoothest, and you position yourself so that the sallie hangs directly before your chest, its woven surface about a hand's breadth away. The rope's tail lies on the floor to your right, its figure-eight coil catching the light in a curve of hemp that seems almost sculptural, and you glance down at it to be sure the loops lie free and unencumbered, which they do, each one nested loosely around the next with enough space for the rope to run out without catching. The floorboards under your feet are solid and true, the joints between them tight, and the slight spring that you feel is the give of the whole timber framework rather than any weakness in the planks. You shift your weight once, twice, settling your boots into the best position, feeling the way the wood supports you evenly from heel to toe. The worn patch where the rope tail has lain over years is slightly depressed under your right heel, a shallow polished hollow that cups your foot with a surprising gentleness as though the floor had been shaped to receive you. You reach out and take the sallie in both hands, not yet pulling, only holding, letting your palms learn the texture of the wool once more. The right hand goes above the left, with about a hand's span between them, and your fingers curve around the sallie's diameter with a grip that is firm without being tight, the kind of hold that would allow a bird to sit in your hand without harm. The wool compresses slightly under your fingers, its springiness pressing back against your skin, and the chevron pattern registers as a subtle alternation of smoother and rougher, the cream bands a little more plush than the faded red. Your thumbs rest against the forward face of the sallie, and your palms wrap around its sides, the heels of your hands making contact with the wool, just at the point where the splice begins to taper. The sallie's weight is modest but present, a small downward pull that speaks of the much greater weight at the other end of the system, the bell itself hanging in stillness above the frame, its mass transmitted through the wheel and the rope like a message delivered without sound. You test the connection with a gentle, almost imperceptible pull, drawing the sallie down by perhaps an inch, and immediately you feel the resistance of the bell's inertia, a smooth, unyielding weight that answers your motion without slack or haste. The rope tightens along its whole length, and high above you the wheel creaks softly, the sound of wood and iron stirring from rest, a low, brief note that fades as soon as it comes. The bell itself does not yet move, for you have not pulled far enough to overcome its stasis, but you sense its presence through the rope as a kind of latent pressure, a stored potential that waits in the bronze. You let the sallie rise back to its original position, and the tension eases, the rope returning to its gentle plumb hang. This small exchange, the giving and taking back of an inch, tells you that everything is connected, and sound, the wheel turning freely on its axles, the rope running true in its guides, the bell seated properly on its gudgeons. It is a confirmation you do not need but always perform, a greeting of sorts between the ringer and the rung. Your feet now adjust themselves as if of their own accord, finding the stance that you have learned through years of ringing. The left foot moves a few inches forward, the right foot a little back, so that your body is angled slightly toward the right, where the rope tail will rise, and your weight settles evenly across both legs, the knees soft and slightly flexed. The distance between your feet is about the width of your shoulders, a stable base that will let you move with the rope rather than against it, and the floorboards feel solid and reassuring beneath your soles. You rock forward and back once, testing the balance, and find it natural, a posture that wants no adjustment. Your shoulders are relaxed, dropped away from your ears, and your arms hang from them with a slight bend at the elbows. The sallie resting in your hands, as though it had grown there. The stance is not rigid, but alive. A readiness that contains no tension, the kind of poised stillness that a heron holds at the edge of a stream. Now you attend to the rope tail that lies coiled on the boards to your right. Bending from the waist, you keep your left hand lightly on the sallie while your right hand reaches down and touches the uppermost loop of the coil, ensuring that it lies free and will pay out in order when the bell begins to swing. The figure-8 pattern is one you have laid 1,000 times. The rope comes down from your hands, crosses the floor in a long diagonal to a point near the east wall, loops back toward the center, crosses itself, and continues in a series of elongated loops that alternate direction so that the whole coil resembles a flattened woven ribbon. It is a pattern that pulls out cleanly, loop after loop, without hitching or knotting, and you verify this now by tracing the rope with your eyes from the sallie down to the first cross, around the loop, and back again, seeing no twists, no places where one loop has fallen across another to form a half hitch. The hemp lies flat on the boards, its pale color bright against the dark wood, and the tail end with its tarred whipping rests on the outermost curve of the coil, pointing toward the east louvers, exactly where you placed it. Satisfied, you straighten up and return your full attention to the sallie. Your breathing, which you had not been aware of in any deliberate way, now makes itself felt as a slow, steady rhythm that matches the quiet of the chamber. You draw the air in through your nose, feeling it travel down into the base of your lungs and expand your ribs, and then you let it go in an even, unhurried stream, a tide of breath that rises and falls without effort. The rhythm of your breathing settles into a natural coordination with the still, waiting bell, as though the bell itself were the center of a great slow breath that included the whole tower. You close your eyes for a moment, not out of any need to concentrate, but simply to let the other senses come forward. The smell of hemp and tallow and old oak, the cool pressure of the floor through your boots, the faint whisper of air through the louvers, and the feel of the sallie in your hands like a held hand. When you open your eyes again, the light seems a little gentler, the shadows a little longer, and the whole chamber appears invested with a quiet, attentive patience. You shift your grip on the sallie by a fraction, moving your right hand up half an inch and your left hand down a similar distance, micro adjustments that distribute the wool's texture more evenly across your palms. The hands now sit at the points where the sallie begins its tapers, the right hand just above the lower splice, the left hand just below the upper one, and the center of the chevron pattern lies between them, a band of cream and terracotta that will ride through your grasp with each pull. Your thumbs remain on the forward face, your fingers curl around the back, and the grip feels secure, balanced, immutable. You test it by giving a very gentle downward pressure, not enough to move the bell, only enough to feel the rope's response, and the sallie yields not at all, the wool gripping your skin as your skin grips it. The bell's weight at the far end is a constant, grave presence, a force that will soon be in motion, but for now, it is a counterbalance to your own stillness. Your gaze lifts to the wheel above the frame, its spokes pale in the light, and you see the rope seated deep in its groove, the hemp resting against the ash with the trust of long acquaintance. The guide block below the wheel shows a line of light along its upper edge where the wood has been burnished, and the rope passes through it with a clearance no greater than the thickness of a straw. You watch the block for a moment, and there is no movement, no tremor, only the settled quiet of a mechanism at rest. The iron gudgeons of the headstock gleam dully at either end of the bell frame, each one nestling in its brass bearing, and the tallow that you will apply later waits in a soft lump on the beam, its surface beginning to shine as the chamber's warmth releases its oil. The stay bar above the headstock is a dark line against the roof timbers, and the slider block sits on its runners, with its nose just touching the stay, ready to arrest the swing if the bell should rise too far. Everything is in place, everything is ready, and the afternoon wraps it all in a stillness that seems to have been waiting for this moment since the tower was built. You now roll your shoulders once, a small circular motion that loosens the muscles across your back, and you feel the shirt slide over your skin with a soft rustle. Your neck is easy, your jaw unclenched, your forehead smooth. The sun through the south louvers warms your left shoulder and the side of your face, while your right side remains cooler in the shadow of the bell frame, and this imbalance is not unpleasant, but rather a reminder of the day outside, the sun's slow arc, the seasons turning. You think of nothing in particular. Your mind is still as the rope, and the only sound is the gentle cooing of the pigeons in the roof, and the far-off, barely audible sound of the lane that might be a cart, or might be the wind. The belfry seems to hold its breath with you, the great bell poised above your head, the rope a quiet line between you and the bronze, and the whole tower a column of waiting. You take one more slow breath and your hands on the sallie tighten, not at all, remaining exactly as they were, firm and easy, ready to pull when the moment comes. You pull down on the sallie with a motion that begins not in your arms but in the whole of your body, a smooth, even descent of the hands that draws the rope, perhaps 2 feet toward the floor, and at once the quiet of the belfry is broken by the first stirring of the bell. The resistance that answers your pull is immediate and substantial, a firm, living weight that travels down the hemp and into your palms, not a jerk, but a steady, increasing pressure that tells of the great bronze mass above beginning to yield its stillness. High overhead, the ash wheel turns in its frame with a low, prolonged creak, a sound that is half wood and half iron. The grooved rim rolling against the rope as the spokes rotate through the dusty air, and the bell itself tilts on its gudgeons for the first time this afternoon, the mouth swinging by the smallest degree away from its rest position. The sound is not yet a ring, only the deep, internal noises of the mechanism coming to life, the gudgeons shifting in their brass bearings with a soft grating sigh, the headstock rotating above the frame, and the clapper inside the bell stirring from its vertical hang to lean a fraction of an inch toward the sound bow. You feel all of this through the sallie as a chain of small resistances that merge into one continuous sensation, the rope transmitting every nuance from the heights above. The downward pull reaches its natural end as your hands arrive at the level of your waist, and without pausing, you allow the rope to rise again, your arms relaxing, your grip remaining firm but not rigid, letting the sallie slide upward of its own accord as the bell swings back. The bell's return is not a fall but a controlled, deliberate rotation, the weight on the rope easing as the mouth reverses its arc, and the wheel turns the other way with a lower, softer creak that is almost a sigh of relief. The clapper, which had brushed near the sound bow on the first stroke, now swings freely inside the bell's waist, not yet striking, but moving through its own small arc, suspended from its staple and subject to the same forces that govern the larger mass around it. The rope's return stroke carries your hands upward to about the level of your chest, and you feel the momentary slackness at the very top of the rise, a brief release of tension that tells you the bell has reached the end of its backward swing and is about to begin again. In that instant of slack, you prepare your hands for the next pull, and the rhythm establishes itself, not as a series of separate actions, but as a single flowing cycle that repeats without hurry or interruption. On the second pull, you draw the sallie down with the same steady pressure, and this time the bell answers with a deeper movement, its arc widening a little so that the clapper now makes contact, not with a full ring, but with a muffled thump that is more felt than heard, a low-frequency vibration that passes up through the bronze and into the frame and down through the rope to tingle against your palms. The sound is dark and soft, a single beat that hangs in the belfry air for a moment and then fades into the timber walls, leaving behind only the creak of the wheel and the faint hum of the gudgeons. The dust that had been drifting so lazily in the sunbeams now begins to stir, its trajectory disrupted by the movement of the air that the bell displaces, and the motes swirl in slow, elaborate spirals, catching the light in flashes of gold. The pigeons in the roof fall silent at the first thump, their cooing replaced by the soft rustle of wings as they resettle themselves on the rafters, and then the silence returns between the strokes, deeper than before because now it is measured against sound. Your body has found its working rhythm by the third pull, the up-down cycles settling into a cadence that matches the natural tempo of your breathing, and the movements become automatic enough that you no longer direct them consciously. The hands ride the sallie with the ease of long practice, the right hand leading slightly on the downstroke, the left guiding the rope's return, and the fingers adjust their pressure minutely to accommodate the changing tension without ever losing their hold. Your feet remain planted in their stance, the left slightly forward, the right slightly back, and your weight shifts from heel to toe and back again, in a subtle, continuous motion that absorbs the rope's pull and release, keeping your body balanced and still. The floorboards creak softly under the repeated pressure, a rhythmic counterpoint to the larger sounds above, and you can feel the whole bell frame vibrating through the soles of your boots. A deep, diffuse hum that is almost too low to hear but unmistakable to the bones. The sallie's wool has warmed under your hands now, the fibers compressing further with each stroke, and the faint scent of lanolin rises from it, a clean animal smell that mixes with the hemp and the tallow and the heated wood. As the bell's arc widens, the clapper begins to find the sound bow more regularly, and the tone of the bell emerges from the muffled thumps like a voice clearing its throat. The note is a full, round, mellow sound, not loud, but deep. A B-flat that has been the bell's voice since it was cast, and each stroke sends it rolling out through the louvers and down across the churchyard. A single pulse of bronze song that travels through the air with a gentle, spreading weight. Inside the belfry, the sound is more complex, a blend of the fundamental note and the series of higher partials that hum in the air around your head, and the timbers of the frame catch the vibration and hold it, so that the chamber itself seems to ring faintly along with the bell. The sound dies away between strokes, not abruptly, but in a gradual, almost reluctant fade that leaves a ghost of itself in the warmed air, and then the next stroke renews it, the same note swelling again from the same source, each one identical to the last, and yet each one its own small event. The rope moves through your hands with a smooth, oiled consistency now, the hemp running over the wheel and through the guide block, without the least snag or hitch, and the sallie rises and falls in a straight line that never wavers. You watch the rope where it passes through the ceiling hole, and you see it moving with a gentle, regular stroke, the hemp polished bright where it travels through the wood, the strands flexing and relaxing in a pattern so steady it might be the breathing of the tower itself. The tail of the rope on the floor stirs from its coil, the loops rising one by one as the bell demands more length, and they pay out in the correct order, the figure eight unwinding without a tangle, the hemp sliding across the warm boards with a soft sighing sound. The light from the louvers continues to fall across the scene in broad golden bands, and the dust now swirls in earnest, rising into the shafts of sun and then sinking back into shadow, tracing the air currents that the bell has set in motion, a slow, silent dance that has no purpose beyond its own beauty. The wheel above creaks with each revolution, a sound that has become as familiar to you as your own heartbeat, and you can distinguish within it the separate notes of the iron axles turning in their brass bearings and the ash spokes flexing under the load. The gudgeons of the headstock emit a low, rhythmic groan that follows the bell's swing, a sound of metal under pressure that is not alarming but reassuring, the voice of a mechanism doing its proper work. The stay bar rocks forward and back above the headstock, its slider block moving slightly on its runners with each oscillation, and the iron bolts that hold the frame together vibrate in their holes, though nothing shifts or loosens. All of these sounds combine into a composite music, low and steady and without surprise, a music that belongs to the belfry as much as the bell's note belongs to the parish. Your mind, freed from the need to direct your body, drifts across the details of the chamber without attaching to any of them. You notice the way the south louvers now cast a warmer light because the sun has moved, and the shadows on the north wall have lengthened by several inches. You notice a pigeon's feather that has been dislodged from a rafter by the vibration and now floats downward in a slow rocking spiral, catching the light as it descends. You notice the worn places on the bell frame, where the wood is polished dark and smooth, and the way the inscription on the bell's waist flashes dully when the bronze swings into a beam of sun. These observations pass through your awareness like leaves on a stream, noted and released, and the rhythm of the ringing continues underneath them, steady as the afternoon itself. The bell's arc is now perhaps 20 degrees to either side of center, a moderate swing that produces a clear tone without straining the frame or the rope, and you maintain this amplitude with small instinctive adjustments of your pulling force. The downstroke requires a slightly firmer pull to overcome the bell's momentum at the end of its backward swing, while the upstroke needs only a guiding hand to keep the rope straight and the tail feeding cleanly. You feel the precise moment in each cycle when the bell reaches the peak of its arc and hesitates before returning, a tiny pause that is transmitted through the rope as a minute easing of tension, and you use that pause to prepare your hands for the next descent. The rhythm is now fully established, a repeating waveform of effort and release that carries you along within it, and the boundary between yourself and the ringing begins to blur, so that you are no longer a person pulling a bell, but part of a single swinging system that includes the rope and the wheel, and the bronze and the tower and the light. The afternoon outside continues on its quiet course. The rooks in the churchyard yews taking no notice of the bell, the hay wain on the distant track moving at its own slow pace, the stream beyond the lane running shallow over its pebbled bed. And all of these things seem to exist in a parallel time, a time that does not intersect with the ringing, but runs alongside it like a companion stream. The bell sounds across the fields with a gentle, rolling note that reaches perhaps half a mile before fading into the air, and anyone who hears it, a shepherd on the hill, a woman in a cottage garden, a child walking home along the lane, receives it as a familiar, expected sound, the sound of a weekday afternoon in a country parish, asking nothing and promising nothing, simply there. Inside the belfry, you hear the bell differently, not as a distant note, but as an enveloping presence, a sound that fills the chamber and your chest and the bones of your skull, and you let it fill you without resistance, grateful for its simplicity and its weight. The rhythm of the ringing settles into a steady, unhurried measure that seems to breathe in the same slow pulse as the afternoon itself, each pull and return blending into a single continuous motion that you no longer guide so much as ride. The sallie rises and falls through your hands with a smooth, oiled consistency, the wool warm and compressed under your fingers, its chevrons a blur of faded terracotta and cream that slides past your palms in an endless, gentle procession. High overhead, the ash wheel continues its creaking revolutions, the rope seated deep in the grooved rim, and the bell's arc widens to a stable amplitude that produces a clear tone with every stroke, a full, mellow note that rolls out through the louvers and across the silent fields. The sound reaches you as a deep, encompassing presence, a vibration that travels up through the soles of your boots and into the bones of your ankles and shins, while the air itself seems to thicken with the bell's voice, each stroke layering a new resonance upon the fading ghost of the last, until the whole chamber is filled with a soft, bronze-colored hum that has no beginning and no end. You feel the rope's tension change continuously through each cycle, a gradual increase as the bell swings to the end of its arc and the hemp draws tight, followed by a gentle easing as the bell pauses at the peak and begins its return, and then a smooth, firm pressure again as you pull it through the downstroke to meet the clapper's strike. The sequence is so regular, so predictable, that your body anticipates every phase without conscious thought, your hands automatically adjusting their grip a fraction tighter on the downstroke and relaxing a little on the upstroke, your weight shifting from the ball of your left foot to the heel of your right in a subtle rocking motion that matches the bell's period. The floorboards beneath you respond with a rhythmic creak, a soft wooden note that falls exactly between the bell's strikes, and you can feel the whole bell frame humming through the planks, a deep, low-frequency thrum that is as much a texture as a sound, felt in the arches of your feet and the palms of your hands. The clapper encounters the sound bow with a consistent, heavy stroke each time, the impact producing not a sharp report, but a round, mellow boom that seems to bloom outward from the bronze and then fold back on itself. The fundamental note accompanied by a faint shimmer of higher partials that linger in the air after the main tone has begun to fade. Inside the belfry, the sound is more complex than the single note heard from a distance. It is a layered thing composed of the bell's primary voice, the ring of the iron clapper against the bronze, the rattle of the frame joints, the creak of the wheel, and the soft rushing sigh of the rope passing through the guide block, all woven together into a single steady tapestry of noise that is somehow restful rather than stirring. The pigeons in the rafters have grown accustomed to the ringing and resumed their soft cooing, their notes a low, intermittent counterpoint to the bell's stronger voice, and from far below you can faintly hear the clock in the transept striking the quarter hour, its light, musical chime barely audible through the stone and timber, but unmistakable once you have attuned your ear to it. The light in the belfry continues its slow, imperceptible migration, the sun having moved far enough west now that the south louvers cast their strongest beams further across the floor, illuminating a wider patch of the worn boards and catching the dust that dances in ceaseless, spiraling currents. The dust is no longer drifting idly, but churning in a slow, silent dance, lifted by the bell's displacement of air and scattered into the sunbeams where it sparkles like a fine, dry mist of gold. You watch the motes rise and fall without fixing your gaze on any one of them. Your vision soft and unfocused, and the endless swirling motion becomes part of the rhythm, a visual echo of the bell's swing and the rope's rise and fall. The shadows cast by the Louvre slats have shifted across the opposite wall, their angles now more acute as the afternoon deepens, and the dark lines of wood alternate with bright bars of light in a pattern that changes almost imperceptibly, like the hand of a clock that moves too slowly to see. Your breathing has settled into a tempo that matches the ringing exactly, the inhale spanning the upstroke and the exhale the downstroke, so that your whole body participates in the cycle and there is no part of you that lies outside the rhythm. The air you draw in carries the mingled scents of the belfry, the dry, dusty oak of the frame, the mineral tang of the iron gudgeons, the faint animal sweetness of the tallow, and the clean, grassy smell of the hemp rope, and these scents seem to intensify with the bell's motion, as though the vibration released them from the wood and metal where they had been stored. Your mind, freed from any need to direct your limbs, wanders across the surface of awareness without settling on any particular thought, drifting from the memory of the climb up the spiral stair, to the view of the churchyard from the louvers, to the feel of the cool stone under your hand when you first entered the church, and these images pass through you like leaves on a slow stream, noticed only briefly, and then released. The rope continues its steady, unvarying journey through your hands, and you feel the subtle differences in texture along the sallie's length as it moves. The slightly thicker center where the wool is most plush, the gently tapering ends where the splice begins, and the occasional small irregularity in the weave, a slightly looser band of cream or a stripe of red that has faded more than its neighbors. Each one a landmark that your palms recognize and greet in passing. The hemp above the sallie is cooler and smoother, running through your loose hold on the upstroke with a faint, whispering sound, and the tail on the floor pays out and retracts in smooth, silent loops, never tangling, never jerking, as reliable as the tide. You have coiled and uncoiled this same rope so many times that the action has worn a shallow, curved groove into the floorboards, a pale track that leads from your feet to the east wall, and the rope now follows this track without conscious guidance, falling into the path of least resistance that it itself has created. The wheel overhead turns with a steady, groaning rhythm, its spokes appearing one by one above the bell frame and then vanishing into the shadow of the roof, and the sound it makes is a composite of several distinct notes: the low creak of the ash rim flexing under the load, the higher, metallic chirp of the iron axles rotating in their brass bearings, and the intermittent, soft groan of the wooden hub as it takes up the torque. These sounds form a pattern that repeats with each revolution, a little song of wood and metal that plays beneath the bell's stronger voice, and you can anticipate each note in the sequence, hearing the creak before it comes and feeling the corresponding tremor through the rope. The gudgeons of the headstock emit a lower, more resonant sound, a deep, grinding hum that rises and falls with the bell's swing, and the stay bar above them rocks gently back and forth, the slider block nudging against the runners with a soft wooden tap that is barely audible but perfectly regular. Time, which had been measured by the clock in the transept when you first entered the church, now seems to dissolve into the rhythm, and you lose track of whether you have been ringing for 10 minutes or 40, the only measure being the slow shift of the sunbeams across the floor and the gradual lengthening of the shadows. The bell's note does not change, each stroke the same B-flat, the same mellow, rolling voice that has called the parish to worship on Sundays and told the passing of the seasons for more than a century, and its constancy is a comfort, a still point in a world of flux. You think of the ringers who stood where you are standing in years long past, their hands on this same sallie, their ears filled with this same note, and the thought comes without any sense of nostalgia or melancholy, simply a quiet recognition of continuity. The unbroken chain of afternoons stretching back to the day the bell was first hung. Your shoulders, which might have grown tired with a less familiar task, remain easy and loose, the motion of pulling originating in the large muscles of your back and flowing down through your arms to your hands, with an economy that wastes no effort. The sallie's woolen grip provides exactly the right friction, neither slipping nor binding, and the thickness of it fills your palms in a way that feels secure and natural. The calluses on your hands, built up over years of this work, register the pressure without discomfort, their thickened skin a perfect interface between flesh and wool. You feel the slight vibration of the rope transmitted through your palms, a buzz that accompanies each stroke and then fades, and this vibration seems to travel up your arms and into your chest, a quiet, internal humming that settles deep within you. The view through the louvers, which you see from the corner of your eye as you face the rope, has changed its character with the sun's descent, the blues of the sky deepening to a richer hue and the greens of the distant hedgerows, taking on a warmer, more golden cast. The narrow lane that winds past the churchyard is still empty, a pale ribbon of dust that lies motionless between the banks of cow parsley, and the stream beyond it glints through the alders, its surface a broken mirror of the sky. A flock of crows that had been foraging in the stubble field has lifted and flown to the elm tree at the far end of the lane, their black shapes settling among the branches like notes on a musical staff, and their occasional calls drift up to the belfry as faint, harsh scratches of sound. You notice these things without pausing in your work, your eyes moving lazily across the opening and then returning to the rope, and the world outside seems both distant and present, a painting that slowly changes while you watch. The bell's arc remains constant, held by the precise balance between your pulling force and the natural decay of its swing, and you know without thinking exactly how much effort to apply on each stroke to maintain this amplitude. Too strong a pull would widen the arc and risk the stay engaging. Too weak would let the bell settle and the note lose its clarity. But your arms find the right force instinctively, a product of muscle memory that lies deeper than conscious decision, and the bell continues to ring with the same steady, unwavering voice. The clapper kisses the sound bow with a heavy, certain stroke each time, and the note blooms outward, full and round, before fading into the continuing hum that fills the chamber. The whole tower seems to breathe with the bell, the stone walls expanding and contracting by microscopic degrees with each vibration, and you feel yourself breathing with it too, a single organism of flesh and wood and bronze and air. The rhythm has become so steady, so all-encompassing, that you enter a state of quiet absorption where the boundaries of yourself soften, and there is only the swing, and the sound, and the warm wool in your hands, and the dust dancing in the sun, and the slow, silent turning of the afternoon toward evening. No thought distracts you, no memory intrudes, and the ringing continues as though it had no beginning and would have no end, a circle of sound that turns on itself without ceasing. You hear the bell's note fade and renew, and each cycle is the same as the last, yet each carries its own infinitesimal difference, a slight variation in the wheel's creak or the clapper's strike or the way the sunlight catches the edge of the bronze, so that no two strokes are precisely identical. The rope rises and falls, the dust swirls, the pigeons coo, and somewhere in the far distance a dog barks once and then falls silent. And all of it is woven into the rhythm, part of the same slow, peaceful texture that fills the belfry and the tower and the whole wide afternoon. The time comes, not because the clock demands it, but because the rhythm itself seems to arrive at a natural pause, when you decide to let the bell slow and return to rest. You reduce the force of your downstroke gradually over the course of several cycles, pulling with less conviction each time, so that the bell's arc begins to diminish, each swing a little shorter than the one before, and the clapper strikes the sound bow with a softening touch that produces a quieter, more gentle note. The wheel overhead turns more slowly now, its creak lengthening into a low, drawn-out groan that speaks of deceleration, and the rope moves through your hands with a decreasing vigor, the wool of the sallie warming and cooling in a slower rhythm. The bell's voice, which had filled the belfry with its steady, rolling tone, now fades by degrees, each stroke a little more muted than the last, the fundamental note losing its fullness and the higher partials dropping away until only a soft, bronze hum remains. And then even that hum thins to a whisper as the arc narrows to a few degrees and the clapper ceases to reach the sound bow, hanging silent inside the waist, while the bell continues to swing through a diminishing arc with no voice at all. You let the rope rise and fall with the bell's residual motion, your hands riding the sallie gently now, not pulling but merely accompanying the swing, feeling the tension slacken with each oscillation until the bell is barely moving and the rope sways like a slow pendulum coming to rest. The tail on the floor has ceased its active paying out and now lies in loose coils that stir only slightly with the last movements of the rope, the hemp settling into stillness with a soft, final rustle. The wheel gives one last faint creak as it turns through its final degrees, and then it stops, the spokes motionless against the dark timbers of the frame, the rope seated quietly in its groove. The gudgeons sigh once more in their brass bearings and then fall silent, and the stay bar above the headstock rocks gently to center and holds there, the slider block nudging up against it with a soft wooden tap that marks the end of motion. The pigeons in the rafters, who had been silent through the ringing, resume their cooing with a tentative, low note, as though testing the quiet to be sure it is real. You stand for a moment with your hands still resting on the sallie, feeling the last tremor of the bell settling dissipate through the hemp and into your palms. A faint, diminishing vibration, like the memory of sound fading from a plucked string. The belfry seems to exhale around you, the timbers releasing the tension they have held through the ringing, and the air which had been churned by the bell's displacement now returns to its former stillness, the dust motes ceasing their spiral dance and drifting once more in the lazy, aimless patterns of before. The light through the louvers has moved further still, the south openings now casting their beams almost to the north wall, and the shadows have grown longer and softer, their edges blurring as the sun sinks a little lower. You release the sallie and let it hang free, the rope settling back to its natural plumb, the chevron pattern still bright in the fading gold of the afternoon. Now you turn your attention to the stay, that stout ashwood bar bolted across the headstock high above the bell frame, whose purpose is to intercept the slider block and prevent the bell from overswinging at the perilous inverted point. You have not yet climbed to inspect it today, and the ringing has reminded you that the slider should be checked and the tallow renewed, for the mechanism must move freely if it is to arrest the bell without shock or damage. You walk to the east side of the chamber, where a short ladder of oak rests against the bell frame, its rungs worn smooth by years of use and its side rails marked with the faint impressions of hands. The ladder is not heavy, and you lift it easily, carrying it across the floor and setting it against the north side of the frame, where the rungs will give you access to the stay and the slider without requiring you to climb onto the frame itself. The ladder's feet rest securely on the floorboards, their ends shaped to a slight angle that matches the floor's worn surface, and you test the stability by pressing down on the third rung with your hand before you commit your weight. You climb slowly, one rung at a time, your boots finding the worn centers of each tread, and your hands grip the side rails with a light, secure hold. The ladder creaks softly under your weight, a sound that is absorbed by the massive timbers of the frame and lost in the larger quiet of the belfry. As you rise, the perspective changes, and you see the bell from a new angle, looking down at its crown where the headstock crosses above it, the iron gudgeons gleaming in their bearings, the wheel rising beyond with its spokes pale against the roof. The air is warmer up here, heated by the sun on the roof tiles and by the bell's recent motion, and it carries the faint metallic scent of the bronze more strongly than at floor level. You reach the top of the ladder and stop with your head level with the stay bar, your hands coming to rest on the frame's top timber, the oak dry and smooth under your palms. The stay is a horizontal bar of ash, perhaps 4 feet long and 4 inches square, bolted to the headstock with 2 heavy iron bolts, whose square nuts are tight against the wood. The ash is pale and close-grained, its surface showing the fine, straight lines of the grain and a few small knots that have darkened with age to a deep brown. You run your hand along the length of the stay, feeling the smooth, plain surface and the slight undulations where the wood has dried and settled over decades, and you look for any sign of cracking or splitting, any flaw that might cause the stay to fail under load. The wood is sound, its surface unbroken except for the small shallow dents where the slider block has made contact over countless rings, and these dents are polished smooth by friction, the fibre of the ash compressed into a darker, harder patch that glints faintly in the light. You press your thumbnail into the wood beside one of these dents and feel the resistance of healthy, seasoned timber. the same resistance it has offered for years. The slider mechanism is mounted on a pair of runners fixed to the top of the frame, two parallel bars of oak that form a track along which the slider block can move. The block itself is a rectangular piece of beech, about 8 inches long and 3 inches wide, with a rounded nose that faces the stay and a flat back that butts against a stock block at the far end of the runners. The nose of the slider is polished bright by its contacts with the stay, the beechwood showing a pale, almost white surface where the fibers have been burnished, and the rest of the block is a warm honey color, darkened by the tallow that has been worked into it over time. The slider sits on the runners with a close sliding fit, and you reach out and take hold of it with both hands, gripping it firmly and pushing it gently back along the track. The slider moves with a smooth, easy glide, the tallow that remains on the runners providing just enough lubrication to let it travel without resistance or chatter. You push it back as far as it will go, until its rear face meets the stop block, and then you draw it forward again, feeling the even, consistent friction of wood on wood, the beech sliding over the oak with a low, soft sound that is almost a hiss. You repeat this motion several times, working the slider back and forth along its full travel, and you feel no binding, no rough patches, no tendency to stick, only the steady, predictable movement of a well-fitted mechanism. The runners show a thin film of old tallow, dark and waxy, and you note that it has become dry in places, the wood beginning to show through where the grease has worn away. You climb down the ladder carefully, rung by rung, and once again on the floor you go to the low beam where your satchel rests. The lump of tallow that you took out earlier has softened in the warmth of the chamber, its surface now shiny and slightly tacky, and you pick it up along with the cloth from your belt. The tallow feels cool at first touch, but warms immediately in your palm, its texture yielding and smooth, and it releases its clean, animal scent more strongly now that it has begun to soften. You carry the tallow and the cloth back to the ladder and ascend again, holding the tallow carefully in your left hand while your right grips the rail. At the top, you set the tallow on a flat section of the frame timber where it will not roll, and you wipe your hands on the cloth to remove any dust or hemp fibers before you begin. You take the tallow between your thumb and first 2 fingers and scoop a small amount onto your fingertips, the substance soft and pliable, warming further with the heat of your skin until it reaches the consistency of firm butter. Leaning over the frame, you apply the tallow to the runners, one on each side of the slider, spreading it in a thin, even layer that covers the entire length of the track, from the stop block to the forward end. The tallow goes on smoothly, its pale color bright against the dark oak, and you work it into the wood with small circular motions of your fingertips, feeling it sink into the grain and fill the tiny pores of the timber. The old dry patches accept the new grease gratefully, the wood darkening as it absorbs the tallow, and the fresh application blends with the residue of the old, creating a continuous glossy film that will keep the slider moving freely for many rings to come. The slider itself receives a fresh coating as well, its bottom surface and its rounded nose, and you spread the tallow evenly with your fingers, paying particular attention to the nose where it will meet the stay. The beech takes on a deeper, richer color under the grease. The honey tone warming to amber, and the polished patch grows more reflective, catching the light from the louvers in a soft gleam. You wipe your fingers on the cloth and test the slider again, pushing it back and forth several more times to distribute the fresh tallow, and the motion is even smoother than before, the block gliding along its track with a silent, effortless ease that is deeply satisfying to feel. The stay bar you do not grease, for it must remain dry to catch the slider firmly, but you run the cloth over its surface to remove any dust that may have settled during the ringing, leaving the ash clean and pale. Satisfied with the work, you gather the remaining tallow and the cloth and descend the ladder once more, your boots making the same soft, rhythmic sounds on the rungs. On the floor, you return the tallow to its linen wrap and place it back in the satchel, folding the cloth neatly and tucking it into your belt where it hangs ready. The ladder you carry back to its resting place against the east wall, setting it down carefully so that its feet rest exactly on the impressions they have made in the floorboards over years. You stand then in the center of the worn circle beneath the bell, looking up at the stay bar and the slider, now freshly greased and gleaming faintly in the afternoon light, and you feel the quiet satisfaction of a task completed, a small piece of maintenance that will keep the bell safe and the mechanism sound for the next ringer and the next, and the next. A chain of care that extends back through time and forward into years you will not see. With the stay checked and the slider freshly greased, and the ladder returned to its resting place against the east wall, you find yourself standing once more in the center of the belfry, the worn floorboards solid under your boots, and the great bell silent above you. The work of the afternoon is done, the ringing completed, the maintenance attended to, and what remains is a space of time that belongs to no particular task, a pause that you have earned by the simple fact of having finished what you came to do. The bell hangs motionless in its frame, its bronze surface dim and ancient, the inscription around its waist catching the light in faint, raised letters that spell out their half-legible message to the empty air, and the rope descends from the wheel in a straight, still line. The sallie hanging at its chest-height position with the chevrons blowing softly in the amber light. The belfry has settled back into its deep, waiting quiet, the kind of quiet that seems to have texture and weight, and you feel no impulse to break it. No need to move or speak or think, only the quiet desire to let the moment stretch. You walk slowly to the south louvers, drawn not by any particular curiosity, but by the simple fact that the afternoon light is falling through them with a richer, deeper gold than before, and the view beyond the slats has been present at the edge of your awareness throughout the ringing, without ever being the focus of your attention. The floorboards creak softly under your boots as you cross the chamber, each step a low wooden note that fades as soon as it sounds, and you come to a stop a few inches from the wall, close enough to feel the slight current of outside air that passes through the gaps between the louvre slats. The slats are broad planks of oak, set at a steep downward angle, and weathered on their outer faces to a silver grey, while their inner faces retain the darker, warmer brown of the original wood, and the gaps between them are perhaps 3 inches high, enough to give a clear view of the world below while keeping out the rain and the worst of the wind. You place your hands on the sill, a solid beam that runs the width of the opening, and you lean forward just slightly, bringing your eyes level with the middle gap between the slats, and the countryside opens before you like a page in a book that you have read many times but never grown tired of. The view is framed by the dark edges of the louvers, a long horizontal rectangle that contains within it a wide sweep of the parish, from the churchyard directly below to the rising fields beyond the lane and the distant line of the downs where they meet the pale sky. The afternoon light, now well past its zenith and sliding toward the early edges of evening, washes the entire landscape in a soft golden glow that seems to deepen the greens and warm the browns and lend a gentle radiance to every tree and hedge and furrow. Directly beneath you, the churchyard spreads out in a neat, irregular shape, its boundaries marked by the low stone wall you passed on your way in and by the dark mass of the yew trees that stand sentinel at the corners. The grass is shorn close but not cropped, the work of the sheep that is sometimes brought in to graze among the stones, and its colour is a muted green, tinged with the first hints of autumn's approach, a slight tawny undertone that speaks of the season's turning. The gravestones lean at various angles, some upright and straight, others tilted by the slow subsidence of the earth over centuries, and their surfaces catch the light in patches of grey and silver, the carved inscriptions invisible from this height but present as a texture of shadow and line. The path you walked earlier is a pale ribbon that curves from the lych gate to the porch, its flagstones half hidden by the grass that has encroached upon them. And from above, it seems more like a natural feature than a made thing, a vein of stone running through the green. Beyond the churchyard wall, the lane runs east to west in a narrow, winding course, its surface of packed earth and gravel showing a pale, dusty colour where the sun strikes it and a darker, cooler grey where the hedge shadow falls. The lane is empty now, as it has been all afternoon, and it stretches away to the left, toward the village, and to the right, toward the open country, without a single figure moving upon it. A quiet thoroughfare that asks nothing of the day. The hedgerows on either side are thick and deep, a tangle of hawthorn and blackthorn and elder, their leaves still green but beginning to show the faintest touches of rust and gold at the edges, and the elderberries hang in heavy dark clusters that will soon be stripped by the birds. At intervals along the hedge, a gate opens into a field, and each gate is a simple construction of wooden bars painted a faded grey-green. their posts leaning slightly with the weight of years. The fields themselves form a patchwork that stretches from the lane to the foot of the downs, a quilt of different greens and golds, stitched together by hedgerows and low stone walls. The nearest field is a pasture of rough grass where a dozen sheep are scattered, their white shapes standing out against the green like small stationary clouds, their heads down as they graze with the slow, ceaseless patience of their kind. The field beyond that has been left fallow, its surface a pale brown stubble where the wheat was cut some weeks ago, and the stubble glints in the low sun with a silvery sheen that shifts as the light moves. Further still, a field of root crops shows a darker, richer green, the leaves of the turnips or the swedes forming a dense, ruffled carpet that catches the shadow of a passing cloud, a cool, dark patch that drifts slowly across the rows and then passes on, restoring the full, warm light. The downs rise beyond the fields, their flanks smooth and rounded and clad in short, golden turf, and above them the sky opens out in a vast, pale dome that is veined with high cirrus, thin streamers of cloud that catch the first hints of the approaching sunset, a faint peach color just beginning to blush at their western edges. You shift your gaze to the east, moving along the Louvre opening, and you see the stream that runs beside the lane before it veers away across the water meadow, its course marked by a line of alders and willows whose leaves move gently in a breeze that is too light to feel from the Belfry. The stream itself is visible in glimpses between the trees, a narrow, shining band of water that flows over a bed of chalk and flint, its surface broken here and there by the pale shape of a stone or the dark ripple of a deeper pool. A kingfisher darts from a branch and flies low over the water in a flash of electric blue that is gone as soon as it appears, a moment of color so brief and so bright that it seems almost imagined. The alders lean over the stream with their roots half exposed in the bank, and the willows trail their long, slender leaves in the current, the leaves moving back and forth with the flow in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. To the west, the village shows itself as a compact cluster of roofs and chimneys set within a fold of the land, the thatch of the cottages, a warm, weathered brown that blends with the surrounding fields, and the thin threads of smoke that rise from the chimneys are almost straight in the calm air, bending only slightly to the south as they climb. Pale grey columns that dissolve into the sky at a height of perhaps 100 feet. The church tower casts a long rectangular shadow that stretches across the churchyard and reaches almost to the lane, its shape distorted by the angle of the sun and the uneven ground, and the louvers that you stand behind are dark squares within that shadow, cool and hidden while the rest of the tower glows in the warm amber light. A cart stands in a yard near the village's edge, its shafts empty and its wheels sunk slightly into the packed earth, and a dog lies beside it, a small dark shape that might be sleeping or might be watching something in the grass, its stillness so complete that it might be carved from wood. The sounds that reach you up here are few and faint, carried on the same light breeze that stirs the willows and moves the high cirrus across the sky. The rooks in the churchyard yews are the most constant presence, their calls a rough conversational cawing that rises and falls without pattern, a sound so familiar that it barely registers as sound at all, but rather as part of the afternoon's texture. From the village comes the distant, rhythmic thud of an axe striking wood, someone splitting logs for the evening fires, and the sound travels across the fields with a slight delay, the visual of the axe falling, and the audible thud arriving a moment apart. The sheep in the near pasture bleat occasionally, a high, thin note that carries surprisingly far, and the dog near the cart lifts its head once and barks twice, then settles again. The stream, which would be audible if you were standing beside it, is too far away to hear, but the memory of its sound is so strong that you can almost imagine it, a soft, continuous murmur that underlies the other, intermittent noises. You stand at the louvers for a long, unhurried while, your weight resting easily on the sill, your eyes moving slowly across the landscape, and you feel the quiet seep into you like water into dry earth. The bell behind you is a silent presence, its work done, its voice spent for now, and the rope hangs still, the sallie chevrons catching the light in bands of terracotta and cream. The stay bar above the headstock gleams with its fresh coating of tallow, the slider block ready on its runners, and the wheel waits with its spokes motionless against the dark roof. Everything is in order, Everything is as it should be, and the afternoon continues its slow, imperceptible slide toward evening, the shadows lengthening by the smallest degree, the colors deepening, the air cooling by a fraction, and all of it happening with a quiet, natural grace that asks only to be noticed and appreciated. The light through the louvers has now taken on a distinctly amber cast, the gold of late afternoon giving way to something richer and deeper, a honeyed glow that seems to thicken the air itself. The dust motes have settled again, their dance finished with the bell's motion, and they lie in a fine, invisible film on the floorboards and the frame and the bell's bronze surface, waiting for the next ringing, the next stirring of the air. The pigeons in the rafters have fallen silent once more, their cooing replaced by the soft, occasional rustle of feathers as they settle for the coming night. And the belfry holds its breath in the long, golden pause between the work of the day and the coming of the dark. You feel no urge to leave, no pull of any duty beyond this moment. And so you stay a little longer, your eyes on the distant downs and the pale sky and the slow, silent turning of the world. You turn at last from the louvers, letting your hands fall from the sill as the view of the countryside recedes from your immediate attention and becomes once more a memory held gently at the back of your mind. A warm golden image of fields and hedgerows and the distant downs under a sky that has begun its slow transformation toward evening. The belfry has grown a little darker while you stood at the window, the shadows gathering in the corners and the light from the louvers, now a deep, concentrated amber that stretches across the floorboards in elongated rectangles, and the air feels cooler by a degree or two as the sun sinks further behind the western hills. The bell rests in its frame, with the patience of an object that has no concept of time, its bronze surface holding the last gleam of the day in a soft green-tinged luster, and the rope hangs motionless, the sallie chevrons dimming as the light withdraws from them. You take a slow breath that fills your lungs with the quiet, dusty scent of the belfry, and then release it in an even, unhurried stream, feeling the day's work settle into your bones as a pleasant, gentle fatigue. You walk across the chamber to the low beam where your satchel and lantern wait, your footsteps the only sound now that the pigeons have fallen silent and the distant caws of the rooks have faded with the advancing hour. The satchel lies where you left it, the leather flap open and the spare cord and the beechwood wedge still nestled inside, and you close the flap with a careful hand, fastening the buckle that holds it shut, a small, final action that marks the end of the work. The lantern beside the satchel still burns with its steady amber flame, the candle having burned down by perhaps a third since you lit it in the nave, and the horn panes glow warmly, casting a small circle of light that seems brighter now that the daylight is beginning to ebb. You lift the lantern by its handle, feeling the warmth of it against your palm, and you raise it to check the flame, which is steady and strong behind the translucent horn, a reliable companion for the descent. The tallow wrapped in its linen, you have already returned to the satchel, and you now lift the satchel itself, settling the strap over your shoulder where it finds the familiar groove in your coat, the weight of it slight and reassuring. You cast a final glance around the belfry, a slow, circular look that takes in the great bell and its frame, the wheel with its grooved rim and ash spokes, the stay bar gleaming faintly with fresh tallow, the slider block resting against its stop, the rope hanging straight and true from the ceiling hole, the floorboards worn smooth by the feet of ringers past and present, and the 4 louvered openings where the sky beyond is now a soft, peach-tinged blue. Everything is in order, exactly as it should be, and the chamber seems to hold itself in a state of quiet readiness, prepared to wait through the night and the days until the next ringer comes to pull the sallie and wake the bell's voice again. You feel a quiet kinship with the place, a sense that you are part of its long, slow history, one link in a chain that stretches back to the masons who built the tower, and the founders who cast the bell, and forward to the ringers who will stand where you are standing after you are gone, and the feeling is not one of pride or melancholy, but simply of belonging, a gentle, wordless recognition. You go to the opening in the floor where the spiral stair descends, the square hatch framed by the heavy oak beam you stepped over when you arrived, and you pause there to let your eyes adjust to the comparative darkness of the stairwell. The lantern light spills down the first few steps, illuminating the worn stone treads and the rough surface of the central pillar, and the air that rises from below is cooler than the belfry air, carrying the mineral scent of old mortar and the faint, dry smell of the ringing chamber further down. You lower yourself carefully through the opening, placing one foot on the top step and then the other, and you stand for a moment on the narrow stair with your head still above the floor level, taking a last look at the chamber before you descend. The bell's silhouette is dark against the louvers, the wheel a ghostly circle above it, and the rope catches a single beam of light where it passes through the ceiling hole, the hemp glowing like a golden thread. Then you duck your head and step fully into the stairwell, and the belfry is lost to sight above you, though its presence remains in your awareness like a held note that continues to vibrate after the string is silenced. The descent down the spiral staircase is a slower affair than the climb, not because it is more difficult, but because the afternoon's work has given you a patience that now extends to every movement, a willingness to take each step as its own small event. Your boots find the worn hollows in the treads, the stone smooth and cool under your soles, and the lantern in your hand casts a moving circle of amber light that advances before you and reveals each successive curve of the stair. The slit windows, which admitted pearly daylight on your way up, are now darker, the sky outside having deepened to a dusky blue, and the blades of light they cast across the stone are fainter and more diffuse than before, mere suggestions of illumination rather than the bright, sharp slashes of the afternoon. The cobwebs that you passed on the way up are still there, trembling slightly in the current of air that your descent creates, their silk strands catching the lantern light in delicate, shimmering lines. The stone walls are cool and rough under your free hand, and you feel the familiar undulations of the mason's work, the slight bulges and hollows where the chisels shaped the stone centuries ago. You pass the door to the ringing chamber, its low oak planks dark in the lantern glow, and you hear from within the faint, almost imperceptible creak of the other bell ropes as they hang in their rows, stirred perhaps by the same air current that moves down the tower, or by the memory of the vibration that travelled through the stone when you were ringing. You do not pause, but you glance at the door as you pass, noting the iron latch and the way the wood has worn around it, a shallow depression where the thumb has pressed over years. The stair continues its tight curl, and the central pillar seems to expand and contract as the lantern light plays over its surface, the stone flecked with tiny crystals that sparkle for an instant and then vanish. The count of steps unwinds in the back of your mind, a soft, automatic tally that requires no attention, and the distance to the ground floor shrinks with each tread, the air growing cooler and more humid, the scent of old stone becoming stronger, and beneath it the faint, familiar fragrance of beeswax and prayer books that belongs to the nave. The last turn of the stair brings you to the straight section before the tower door, and the light from your lantern now falls upon the archway and the low oak plank that you pushed open what feels like a long time ago. The door is still closed, the iron ring handle motionless against its plate, and you descend the final steps with the same measured pace, your boots making a soft, flat report on the worn flagstones at the bottom. You stand before the door and turn the handle, which is cool and smooth, its surface worn bright by generations of hands, and the door opens toward you with the same quiet, well-oiled groan that you heard when you entered, the iron hinges moving in their film of dark oil. The nave beyond is darker than you remember it, the light through the leaded windows now a deep, dusky grey that is barely sufficient to illuminate the outlines of the box pews and the tall arcades of the chancel, and the long case clock in the transept, and the long case clock in the transept ticks on with its steady, unhurried rhythm, the only sound in a vast, waiting silence. You step through the doorway and into the nave, closing the tower door behind you with a gentle push that ends in a soft, solid thud, the latch settling into its iron keep with a quiet click. The flagstones are cool under your boots, their worn surfaces reflecting the faint glow of your lantern in a dull gleam, and the scent of the church enfolds you once more, the beeswax and old stone and the dry, papery smell of the Bible on its brass lectern. The nave is empty and still, the box pews standing in their ordered rows, their doors closed, and the memorial on the wall is a pale rectangle in the gloom, the carved cherub's face now entirely lost in shadow. The clock in the transept shows its white enamel face as a dim, ghostly disk, the brass hands marking an hour that you do not trouble to read, for the afternoon has moved beyond the need for precise time and into a more fluid, gentle space where minutes no longer matter. You walk down the central aisle with your lantern held low. The circle of amber light traveling before you across the rush matting and the flagstones, and the sound of your footsteps echoes softly from the high ceiling, a quiet, solitary rhythm that accompanies you toward the porch. The pulpit and the rood screen and the font with its carved wooden cover all pass by on either side, familiar shapes in the darkness, each one a marker of your progress, each one a repository of memories both personal and parochial. The air is cooler here than it was in the Belfry, and you feel it on your face as a gentle, damp coolness that speaks of the evening drawing in, the earth beginning to release the day's warmth back into the sky. You reach the west end of the nave and pause for a moment by the font, looking back at the long, dark space you've just crossed. The tower arch now a deeper blackness at the far end, the great bell silent above it, the afternoon's work complete and already beginning to recede into the past. The porch door stands ajar as it did when you arrived, the gap just wide enough for a person to slip through, and you ease it open a little more with your shoulder, stepping out from the cool, still air of the church into the soft, fresh atmosphere of the churchyard. The change is immediate and striking. The air outside is warmer than it was inside, carrying the scent of grass and earth and the faint sweetness of the yew trees, and the sky above is washed in the first true colors of sunset, the pale blue of the afternoon giving way to bands of rose and gold and a deep, clear aquamarine that stretches toward the eastern horizon. The rooks are settling in the yews for the night, their caws softer now and more intermittent, and a blackbird sings a few notes of its evening song from the hedgerow by the lych gate, a liquid, falling phrase that seems to sum up the whole quiet of the day's end. You close the church door behind you with a gentle, careful hand, feeling the heavy oak meet the frame with a low, solid thump that echoes once against the stone walls and then fades into the evening. The path through the churchyard stretches before you, its flagstones now deep in shadow, the grass on either side darkening to a cool, bluish green as the light drains from the sky. The gravestones lean in their various attitudes, their inscriptions invisible now but their shapes clear in the twilight, and the yew trees mass against the western sky in black, dense silhouettes that seem to hold the last warmth of the sun within their branches. You begin to walk, your pace slow and unhurried, the same measured gait with which you climbed the tower and pulled the sallie and checked the stay, and the satchel on your shoulder and the lantern in your hand are the companions of your progress, the one a weight of tasks completed, the other a small, steady flame against the gathering dusk. The lych gate looms ahead, its grey timbers now almost silver in the fading light, and you pass beneath it with a slight dip of your head, the stone tiles of its roof, a dark solid mass above you. Beyond the gate, the lane runs east and west, pale and empty, the dust scuffed by your boots as you turn onto it, and the hedgerows on either side are alive with the small, rustling sounds of birds settling and insects beginning their nightly chorus. A bat flits overhead, a quick, dark shape that darts and veers with a motion that seems random but is not, and the first star of the evening appears in the east, a single, steady point of light in the deep aquamarine of the upper sky. You walk along the lane with the church tower rising behind you, its bulk dark against the sunset, and you do not look back, because you know the tower will be there tomorrow and the day after, and the bell will wait, and you will return when the time comes to pull the sallie and wake the bronze voice again. The air cools as the light fades, and you feel the evening settling over the fields and the hedgerows and the distant downs, a soft, gradual darkening that brings with it the smells of dew and night-scented flowers. The cottage roofs of the village show here and there a glimmer of candlelight, a warm orange spark that speaks of fires lit and meals prepared, and the ordinary quiet life of the parish going on around you. The dog that lay by the cart has gone indoors, and the cart itself is now a dark shape in the yard, its shafts pointing upward at an angle that seems expectant. The stream beyond the lane still runs over its chalk bed, its sound now faintly audible, as the other noises of the day fade, a soft, continuous murmur that will continue through the night and into the next morning and all the mornings after that. Your own house comes into view as you round a bend in the lane, its thatch dark and low, a single square of warm light showing at the window where a candle has been lit against your return. The door will be unlatched, the hearth warm, and there will be a simple meal waiting, bread and cheese and a cup of ale, the quiet comforts that mark the end of an ordinary day. But before you reach the door, you pause for a moment on the lane, letting the stillness of the evening gather around you, and you listen to the silence that is not silence but a soft composite of stream and breeze and distant sheep, and the last fading notes of the blackbird's song. The bell's voice has long since died away, but its echo seems to linger in your bones. A low, mellow vibration that is not a sound, but a presence. The memory of an afternoon spent in the belfry with the dust and the light and the slow, steady rhythm of the ringing. The day is done, the work is complete, and the world asks nothing more of you than this: to stand for a moment in the lane and breathe the cool air and know that you are part of a long, quiet history that extends back and forward beyond the reach of any single life. A history of stone and wood and bronze and the hands that have tended them, and the hands that will tend them still when the present afternoon has become a distant, golden memory in the mind of a church that forgets nothing and hurries for no one.